I basically will be sharing with you some of my experiences, some stories, and some of my learnings through the last 15 years of running startups. So startup is a maze. So a little bit about me. I was born in Hong Kong originally. My family moved to Calgary. We were part of the 1997 movement. So way before 1997 happened, my family moved to Canada, Calgary. It was a very, very small city at that time. Now it's kind of a technology city. And then later on we moved, and I pretty much grew up in Silicon Valley, in the heart of Silicon Valley, in Cupertino, not Cupertino. Cupertino is where HP, Apple, Intel, and many of the greats of Silicon Valley. And so I went to school in Silicon Valley, high school, junior high school in Silicon Valley, and grew up with all the kids of all the executives at HP, Apple, Intel. And it was quite an experience because we were, this is when the internet took off. So we had Netscape, we had a number of Yahoo is based out of there as well. And I grew up with the dream of startups. In high school, we went to the high school parking lot. We checked out everybody's cars because, we were a very elite group of young kids at that time in the heart of what news and articles wrote about. We had TK Noodle, which is where all the startups and engineers eat, which is like a $2.50 bowl of noodles. And so all the programmers eat there. And so I grew up in that kind of environment. And I started my first company when I was 21 called Ahsoka. And at that time, in 2000, so I'm telling you my age, in year 2000, the bubble burst, right? Worst time. I just graduated. I spent 4 years at Charles Schwab interning, working on global expansion, and when the bubble burst, there was no job for me. I was very lucky. I started working in insurance, but why I started Ahsoka, unfortunately, unlike a lot of founders and technology startup founders, I was not an engineer. I actually, being, I guess, Asian American, people put it, I didn't want to fit in the stereotype of whether I was good at math or science, because I actually sucked at both. And so I was actually an organizational communication major, so that means all I had to do was BS throughout my day. My school was about speaking, public speaking, and impromptu speaking, and that's how I passed through college. And so I didn't grow up saying I was going to start a company. What happened was I was fortunate enough that my father, who worked throughout the computer industry, so my father at the same time, he made all the PET 64 from Commodore. I don't know any of you remember that computer. So I grew up every summer going back on the factory floor. My dad making the Commodore 64 for Commodore. He also was the China manager for Atari gaming systems, if any of you remember that. So I grew up on the factory floor of making Atari systems, and later on DEC and Compaq. So I was always very comfortable with computers, but I was never going to study computer science. I didn't know how to use the computer, but I don't know how to build one. So how did I start Ahsoka? So the reason is my father actually, when I graduated, he decided to retire back in the States instead of being in Asia. And he said, he wanted to do something and start a company. And I think I was cheap labor. Because when I basically helped him form his company, Ahsoka, named his company, created his logo, found him an office, found him his first Caucasian white sales guy. And he quickly decided that the sales guy wasn't really producing, and basically I was very, very cheap labor to do pretty much everything. Anything that he was throwing at me, I took over. And I started Ahsoka, and we were a home networking company. And at that time, wireless networking was coming, and so networking revolution basically happened at that time. This was right when internet happened. There was companies like Linksys and D-Link and Netgear, which was our cream of the crop of networking. Okay, if you're working at Netgear, you were very, you were great because you built a channel and sold your product. I then basically grew Ahsoka from zero to over $6 million in revenue over the course of 6 years. And our customers included AT&T, Bell South, Bell Canada, Comcast, and a number of carriers, not only in the domestic market, but also internationally. We actually also helped even PCCW at that time and helped them launch as part of their IPTV and Now TV and the iPhone. We were pretty much involved with that with the PCCW team here in Hong Kong. After 6 years, growing that company, I was basically scared. I was very scared in terms of how to grow the company to the next level. We had one big customer with two divisions called Motorola. And this was right at the pre-cusp of Motorola jumping off the cliff. And Motorola, we were working with two Motorola business units. The first PO from each of those divisions was over $10 million. At a $6 million revenue, we couldn't fund the project. And so Motorola looked at us and said, you need to get outside investors or we're going to come and invest in you. And so we actually negotiated with Motorola to be our investor. And what happened was we didn't get investment from Motorola. We actually ended up turning Motorola down. A number of reasons. Obviously, as a young startup founder, not confident about what I was doing, I made a lot of mistakes. Mistakes included not really understanding what a financial model is and why anybody would care what the guy that I hired to do the model and whether that information in that model was right. And so it became a credibility issue with me trusting me and knowing how to run my business. And it was quite fascinating because when he started questioning, the numbers, there was a lot of understanding where this individual, this corporate venture was coming in and really taking control of the company, of how I run things. And I basically told my father at that time, I said, I'm happy to step down. I have no problems. I think that's one of the key differences between female and male is that females I don't think we have much of a high ego. And I'm very, and so I was like, I'll step down, take the money from Motorola. It was a good deal. But, my father said, no, we're gonna move forward. Because the person really doesn't know how to run this company. You've been doing it for the last 6 years. You're going to have to find another way to get funding and fund these projects. So what I ended up doing was I ended up with two offers at Ahsoka. One was to acquire the company by a company called Leviton, which is a New York-based company that has been around for over 100 years. The Leviton family makes a lot of the faceplates, sockets, connectors. They do all when you moved into a new home, basically, everything that's fixed, they build. So it was really good. We had a really great deal, great offer. And my second offer was being invested by venture capital. And it was two leading venture capital. One was the Rockefeller Fund by a VC called Venrock, some of you who know them. So these are tier 1 VCs. And the second one was called Storm Ventures, which the founding team basically was one of the early individuals that sold their company to Cisco. So both venture groups are very highly praised in the Valley. And that was I guess, what do you think I picked? I picked, in terms of my options at that time, was to sell my company after 6 years of very hard work and working for a major company in the United States. They're huge. And an option of really growing the company and taking it to the next level and living the Silicon Valley dream. What do you think I picked? Anyone? So I picked my Silicon Valley VC partners, and I'll go through what happened afterwards. So I did pick the VCs, and I was actually very happy at that time to really take a break and pass the baton. So the first thing I said to the VCs was I didn't want to run the company because I really felt and doubt that I knew what I was doing. And we brought in the president of Netgear into our company. So for a small company, interviewing the president of Netgear, which at that time was number 2 company in the networking space, I was also interviewing product management VPs from Cisco, and a number of major company executives was interviewing. It was great. You know, our VCs was putting us in front of really qualified candidates. It was unbelievable. And so we quickly assembled the team, and I was always part of the board meetings. Within pretty much 2 months, our president of president of Netgear, being our new CEO of our company, could basically sat us down and said he didn't know how to grow the company. So the entire board, experienced board, we were scared shitless. We're like, oh my God, the president of Netgear does not know how to grow our company. Who does? So we basically picked the second guy that we were, when we were interviewing the first guy, we had a second guy in line, and we hired the second guy. And the second guy basically did a lot of PR. And it was quite interesting witnessing that as well, because we did a lot of fluff piece on PR in terms of how great our company was, how great we have these new customers and built. So basically what he did was he shipped free samples to a number of carriers, and then he would announce that now these are my customers and they're now distributing our product. So it didn't last very long until we caught on in terms of what was happening in terms of revenue, until the $7 million that I raised became, we spent about $11 million within the first year. So it was quite a heartbreak at that time. The company's still, I think, around, but basically we brought in about 4 CEOs. I left after 1 year because I basically said after the second CEO, I said, I have no say in the company anymore. I can't turn the company around. We did ask the VCs to return the company back to us. They said no, because they felt that we were not able to raise the money again, and that the CEOs that are hired have a higher chance of raising funds for the company. So it was okay. I was young. I was still in my 20s. I was like, screw this. Dad, let's go. So I started my next company venture called Jetlung, and which is what I'm working on right now. It's been about 6 years working on Jetlung. We started the company. I think it was really heartbreaking for my dad to see his baby pretty much die from the VCs. But it was very easy for me to bounce. For whatever reason, I didn't feel so attached to my first company as much as he did. And I think it was because of the age difference, being that it was, he's a certain age where he couldn't bounce and start over the way I could start over. So Jet Lung was quite interesting. We started the company without an idea of what we were going to do. We just basically said we're going to do it again. We registered the company because for tax purposes, tax deduction in the US is very important to us. But what happened was, because we were in the networking space, we were tapped by a number of Silicon Valley companies to help them solve different problems. And that's one of the great things about being in Silicon Valley, is at every coffee shop, we meet up with a bunch of people, and people pretty much tell you their problems. And so you have the have the freedom and the luxury of being able to really think about those problems that interest you and start your own thing. But anyway, sorry it's so long in terms of my history, but I just give you a little background of who I am. And I'll kind of give you today in terms of what I've learned from the two companies. So one of the things I learned is about dream versus reality. People have this image of what Silicon Valley is and the reality of Silicon Valley. I've partied with, I've hung out with a lot of venture capitalists. I've hung out with a lot of entrepreneurs, startup founders in our space, and I go home, we're flooded with Twitter employees and Facebook employees and Airbnb employees in San Francisco. There's still this a lot of people that come to Silicon Valley and start companies with the idea that it's so great, it's such an experience. We have great offices, we get we get beautiful offices, beautiful desks. In fact, before I started my first company, I worked with a company called Excite at Home. I don't know if anybody remember a company called Excite at Home. Excite at Home, it used to be called excite.com, that website. So I worked for that company, and that was like before, when Yahoo got really big and Google. So Excite at Home was the merger between excite.com and At Home, which is the broadband, which is where cable broadband came up. And we had this humongous campus along 101. It was quite funny because so we had so much money, and then right before the dot bubble burst, before that we basically had the best office, and it was like ice cream Fridays and free lunches every day, free breakfasts every day. It was the typical Silicon Valley. If you watch the television series Silicon Valley, it's a little bit like that. And it still is like that in certain campuses like Google, Pixar, Lucasfilms in Silicon Valley. But what I found is that the people that actually do the work in terms of starting the majority of startups isn't so glamorous. People forget that Steve Jobs started in a garage. People forget HP started in a garage. It's not about the dream of raising money, to have a great office isn't what startup is all about. And I think people forget that. And it's like, oh, I want to work for a cool startup, but I want to really think about what is your contribution to this startup. And when you're interviewing for these startups, are you really adding value, or are you trying to be just there for the experience? I have this great story about Lenny Kravitz. I don't know anybody that knows Lenny Kravitz. So he's a big rock star. So I dated this guy who is, a long time ago, musician. So he was working with Lenny Kravitz. And so we hung out with Lenny Kravitz and in New York, and when he was touring. I was like, wow, this major rock star must have a glamorous life, right? Parties, beer, alcohol, women. So amazingly, what we've learned in the backstage was that Lenny doesn't drink. He also doesn't eat like junk food. He eats carrots backstage. He's very, very disciplined in his life, actually. There's really no partying. In fact, there's no sense of relaxing. And I think that's what actually happens to people in startups as well. And I think it really relates well with what startups really are, is that it is not glamorous. We do work long hours. We don't do parties, every weekend. We don't go clubbing all the time. And so you have to decide what kind of life you want. For me, it was very clear, I wanted to do something and create something. And I was willing to give up that. And I didn't make that consciously, it just happened. And so I know, there's quotes here, I think earlier from Elon Musk. And so I worked with SolarCity, which is Elon's cousins, alongside of them several times. And, you watch these people and they actually, Elon's running 3 companies. He plays Xbox for an hour just to clear his head, but most of the time the guy's working. They're not out there, enjoying, holidays, extended holidays. It just doesn't happen. It's nice to, and I think, unfortunately, when you're really an entrepreneur and starting a startup, a technology startup, it is, it's not a 9-to-5 job. And you really then dedicate yourself to growing your business and making it into something. So I think, when you're thinking about starting a company or, think about the what is in the media and what it is in actuality. So working in a male-dominated society, I didn't want to, but it is true over the years. I didn't admit to it when I was younger. So being in the internet and computer industry, I've constantly been involved in meetings, conferences where I was the only female. And not only was I the only female, but I was the only young, short, Asian female. So I had everything against me. And, high-pitched voice, everything. It was, when I was younger, when I first started my first company, didn't want to I hated stereotypes. I was like, I don't fit in those stereotypes. But as I learned over the years that it really exists. I would say there are advantages and disadvantages. I don't know if there's more. I think they're equal. The reality is I would go to meetings. I went to a conference once maybe it was in Amsterdam. I met the president of an international standards body, and he was an executive within a space in a company that I was trying to sell into. It's great. I was meeting with the president of this international standards body, potential customer. Great. So having rapport, building relationship, it's great. So he asked me to join his team for dinner. I said, great, oh my God, this is so nice. When I showed up for dinner, I was the only person at dinner. At the end of the dinner, I was pretty much roped. That would never happen if you were a male. That's the difference. I think it's nice to see, female in the room today. I don't think male actually understands what we go through. As startups, as a technology founder, to go through this process and still be able to wake up next day, face this person, and try to sell to them. A couple years ago, I was working with a big HVAC company, one of their engineers. We got along great, we worked with engineering. I work with engineers all the time. We're chatting. The next thing I knew was the questions came. So what kind of underwear are you wearing today? Now, you can deal with HR internally in your own company, but how do you deal with your customers? How do you deal with industry players? Do you report to their HR? What do you do? Now, I don't think I have an answer other than what other people have told me, which is turn it around into a joke. that basically tells them it's off limits. So I don't take myself very seriously, but those things do happen. At the same time, I don't think I would get the help or the exposure or the opportunities that I've had if I was not a female. I would say that I have had a lot of people that has helped me and taken me under the wing because I was a female. You know, I think part of the reason that I got funded the first time was the fact that I was a female. Okay, so that's why I said there's advantages and disadvantages. But you know, definitely it's still a male-dominated society. You know, in the technology space, today I work in energy management as well as IoT. It's all male. And I still deal with that every day. So I'm always happy to see a female engineer and see a female face in the room. But I would still say there's not enough females that hold executive power, that have a voice in meetings. And that's because it is a male-dominated society. I'm super self-conscious. And I think most females are. We question. We're always questioning ourselves, reflecting in ourselves. Have I done something wrong that led this person on? Have I not as good? And actually, you would think, you know, my father being my partner, would be more supportive. Actually, he always says, well, you know, if you were not a daughter, you were a son, you know, you would have gotten this or that, you know. So I think we try harder. We have to, as females, try harder than male. In a technology society, you know, we go to CES, for example, which is a major consumer electronics show, as well as CeBIT and a number of other international electronic shows. We wine and dine our customers at these conferences. And at CES, just because I think about it, you know, part of the guys take their clients to strip clubs. Where do you take your clients? It does happen, and I think being more self-conscious helps us be better. For males, the majority of people in this room, I think, you know, for guys, I think you need to be more conscious about how you guys display and communicate with other females in the community. So people ask me, you know, people think I'm very intimidating because I'm somewhat submissive. Being self-conscious, I have grown to dress more down. I've done a lot of things that make me not approachable anymore. So people think I'm pretty fearless in terms of going into industries that I know nothing about. When I went into the utility space, I didn't talk the talk. I didn't know anybody in the space, and I just knocked doors. I just knocked on doors. And it didn't matter if I didn't know the technology. When I built my first software product, I don't write a line of code. I just do a lot of research and learn and absorb as much as I can. It's not that I am fearless, it's just I'm completely naive. I started my company when, as I mentioned, 21. I was completely naive in terms of what the real world was, what startups really meant. So it's not like I started the company and started this industry knowing what I was set up to do. I'm not a person that really set up goals and say, I'm gonna do this is how I'm gonna do it. I just go at it. It's like, it's just gotta be done. And you know, and I think part of being a founder is that being naive is a blessing sometimes, because it makes you ignorant about all the scary parts of starting your own business. However, what I found was this, you know, half full, half empty saying is that I'm all, you know, in terms of who you really are. So I'm always a half full kind of girl. I always look at the bright side of things, and that the world is full of opportunities. No matter how many rejections, how many no's, how many failures that you've had, it's still possible to do things. So you need to really think about, who you are as a person. Because if you're a pessimist, you're a realist, it's great, but it might not be a startup. You might not be a startup because there are so many lows and there's so many downs. And you're gonna have to maintain and wake up every day and continue forward. Because as you grow your company, people start depending on you. Your staff depends on you, your staff's family depends on you. And you need to really provide that vision that glass is still half full, to continue to motivate yourself. And you need to find ways of motivating your staff and yourself without anybody motivating you. Because a lot of times you are standing there all by yourself. And it is about teamwork. So I started both companies, with my father. It's very lucky. Lucky and unlucky at the same time. He's a great guy. So we're a two-person team. The first company, actually, my sister was involved, my older sister. She was not a great team player, unfortunately. And the first company, we actually ended up having to terminate her because she was not a team player. And we had somebody else do it. We had somebody else terminate my sister. Yeah, it's not easy termination. So teamwork. Why did we have to fire my sister? She's the best salesperson. I'm a horrible salesperson. She's the best salesperson. Her nickname is Pitbull. So like if she gets an account, she's like, she bugs the customer until they buy. So she's great. You give her a quota, she hits it. But the problem is she was not about teamwork. She was about, well, I'm bringing the revenue in, so I'm the best, right? But it wasn't about that. If she brought the revenue in and the team didn't deliver, she's not going to get the revenue. It's about a team process. It's not a one single person to deliver to a customer. It's about a team. So we had to identify that she was the problem and decided that it was time to let her go. And that was really, really hard. Obviously, there was a lot of family drama, especially in Chinese families. A lot of dramas. But it was a learning experience. So I continued to work with my father. We learned ways to deal with each other and work as a team. What was interesting was that we struggled to communicate with our staff, and we still do. We have our own ways of communicating and then ways of communicating with our staff. It's really important to identify your I call it the four-legged stool, so you can have your team to help hold you up, because you are fighting a battle to win customers, to win market share, and you need your team behind you to deliver when you're running around trying to conquer the world. So I go back to open communication. It's been very interesting to think about as you grow your business and you're running and raising money, not having open communication. There's so many ways of communicating. So I would admit that I'm a terrible person at communicating. I don't like to talk on the phone. I'm a very quiet person most of the time. And so I just chat. I love texting. I love chatting. I hate picking up the phone and talking. And I expect my employees to read my mind. Actually, you ask them, they'll tell you. And it's really bad. And it's something that I'm personally working on because your staff, even your families, doesn't know what's happening in your head, doesn't understand the meeting that you've just had. And sometimes it's really hard to put things in words anyways. And so a lot of times I just write it down and I send a mass email to my staff just so they know what was going on. So whatever your means is to build that teamwork within your company, find a way to communicate with the rest of the staff. Because as soon as you don't communicate, your staff, the people that you depend on, will start questioning, doubting, and then there will no longer be teamwork. And that's something that I've learned over the years. So I think that's it. I'm just trying to share some of my experiences with all of you. Let me know. Feel free to connect with me if there's any questions.